So fascia of the lower limbs and its relations. So this video will be in details explanations of the fascias of the lower limbs and its neighboring. So what we have here is, so in this picture I'm showing you three fascias. So fascia, we are referring to the band or strip. So the first fascia we have would be the gluteal fascia. So the gluteal fascia, as from the name itself, gluteal refers to the buttock. So gluteal fascias only cover the posterior part of the buttocks, and you will have the fascia lata, L-A-T-A. So fascia lata, lata refers to broad, so it's a broad fascia. And lastly, we will have a crural fascia. So crural fascias referring to leg. So crural is leg. So lata is broad, crural is leg. So now we have a misconception that many people would thought that the lower limbs consist of the leg. No, it's not true, because the lower limbs, we have two parts. The first upper part would be the thigh, and the lower part would be the leg. So remember, leg only consists of the lower part of the lower limb. So this would be showing you the gluteal fascia. So you can see the border of the gluteal fascia. So you can see the superior border would be attached to the iliac crest, and you can see the lateral border, the inferior border, and the medial border and the inferior border. So in this case, my point is that the gluteal fascias cover the posterior part of your buttock. Okay, that's all for the gluteal fascia. Now we move on to the fascia lata. So in this picture, we can see that fascia lata is a broad fascia. It covers the anterior and the posterior part. So as you can see from here, you have the border lines of the fascia lata. So fascia lata attach superiorly to the inguinal ligaments. So inguinal ligament is highlighted in pink. So that would be the inguinal ligaments. So fascia lata attached superiorly to the inguinal ligaments. Okay? So, and to the pubic arch. So pubic arch, which can also form a pubic angle, and the pubic body, okay, the body of the pubis. So this picture showing you the posterior part of the fascia lata. Remember, the gluteus fascias only cover the posterior parts of our buttock, while the fascia lata, they covers both anterior and posterior, especially our femur. Okay, so now we move on to the fascia lata, also attached to the iliac crest laterally and posteriorly, and to the pubic tubercle. So tubercle would be the prominences or the protuberance of the pubic. Okay, so fascia lata also continuous with another fascia, which is the scapal fascia. So scapal fascia is a superficial fascia, but it's deep to the campal fascia. Okay, we are not going to cover this fascia in detail. So now we move on to the crural fascias. So this would be the borderlines of the crural fascia. So fascia lata is also continuous with the crural fascia, which is the leg fascia. Okay, so now you can see that in this picture I'm showing you with the arrow, which is the iliotibial tract. So iliotibial tract is actually part of the fascia lata, is the thickening part of the fascia lata, but this thickening of the fascia lata is thickened with a longitudinal fiber. As in the previous picture, you can show that the fascia lata is slightly oblique in its fiber, the fibers running obliquely, but in iliotibial tract, it thickens. So the fascia lata thickens with the longitudinal fibers. So this form a really dense connective tissue called iliotibial tract. So why it is known as iliotibial tract? From its name itself, you can see that ilio is from the ilium. Okay, so iliotibial tract extends from, you can see, from the iliac tubercle, ilium tubercles, to the tibial, the anterolateral tibia tubercle. So from two tubercles, one is the ilium tubercle itself, another one would be the tibia anterolateral, that means anterior and lateral tubercle of the tibia. So this would be the extensions of the iliotibial tract. As you can recognize that iliotibial tract is located in between the gluteus maximus and the tensor fascia latae. So as you can see from here, the tendons of both gluteus maximus and the tendon fascia latae, they fuse together with the iliotibial tract, forming the aponeurosis, which is the flat tendon. So let's move on to the facial lateral intermuscular septa. So this is one of the three septa, which is quite important in our discussion. So this fascia is located deep to our iliotibial tract. As you can see from the picture, you have the iliotibial tract superior or superficial, more superficial to the facial lateral intermuscular septa. So this intermuscular septa still have the extensions. It attached to the linear aspera. So the lateral side attached to the linear aspera. Linear aspera would be the rough lines on the posterior surface of the femur, and the lateral supracondylar line, which is just below the linear aspera of the femur. So now we move on to a very, very important point here, which is a hole that you can find here. So this hole is known as the saphenous hole. So saphenous opening. So saphenous is just a name for the superficial vein. So why it is known as the saphenous hole opening? Because you have the great saphenous vein passing through this opening and join with the femoral vein or drain into the femoral vein. So in this saphenous opening, you have the smooth margin, and you have another margin, which is a falciform margin. So this falciform margin is actually a sharp and crescent shape. So you can see the shape of the margin is quite sharp at the edge. So the superior edge, the lateral edge, and the inferior edge are sharp. So it's crescent. So falciforms refer to the crescent shape, like a moon shaped. Okay. So when compared to the smooth margins with no sharp edges. So now we move on to the vessels passing through this foramen, this opening. That would be first our great saphenous vein. So this great saphenous vein will drain into the femoral vein. It passes through the saphenous opening and drain into the femoral vein. And you have another one would be the efferent lymphatic vessels. You have a network of lymphatic vessels which would drain into the superficial inguinal lymph nodes, and from the superficial inguinal lymph nodes towards the deep inguinal nodes. So, and you have another fascia found in this small opening. So this fascia is known as our cribriform fascia. So as you know from our oral cavity, you have the cribriform plate in our ethmoid bone. So why this is known as cribriform fascia? As you know, it have holes in it. So holes within the fascia to allow the vessels to pass through. So that's why this is known as the cribriform fascia. So cribriform fascia is a sieve-like fascia with holes within it. Okay, this hole functions to allow the vessels to pass through it, such as your efferent lymph vessels, and your great saphenous vein. So we move on to our last thing, which is the crural fascia. As you know that the crural fascia is slightly special in this case because you have a thicker fascia upwards, and when you go downwards you will have a thinner fascia. Okay, so it thickens upward and distal to the body, the distal parts of the legs would be more thinner. But at the distal part of the leg, especially at the ankle part, you have an extensor reticulum. So you have the extensor reticulum just like you have it on your waist. Okay, so extensor reticulum is just a thickened part of the fascia to form a band of tissues. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you. If you like this video, please subscribe and like it. Thank you so much. And this is from Medicines Made Easy.